Alright guys, in today's video what I wanted to do is go over my 2020 PlayStation predictions. I thought that this would be a good video to do for the first day of the new year. There's no doubt that 2020 is going to be a massive year for gaming in general, but also a massive year for PlayStation considering this is the year the PS5 releases, but we know that the majority of the year is going to be a lot of build up to what we can expect to see with the PlayStation 5 when it finally launches in holiday of 2020. So I have 6 main predictions that I'm going to be making, but within each main prediction, I'm going to kind of run off a few details within that prediction itself. So basically 6 big things that I think are going to happen throughout the year, and then we're going to kind of go into the details of what's going to happen within each of those big events. So let's get into it here. Starting with number 1, I'm going to predict a February 2020 PlayStation 5 reveal, and I think it's going to be a full reveal. I think that Sony is going to announce the PlayStation 5, and they're going to show the console this time. They're not just going to show the DualShock 5 controller like they did with the PlayStation 4. I think they're going to do it all at one time, especially considering the Xbox Series X is already out there and everybody already knows what it looks like. I don't think it would make much sense for Sony to not show the entire box. I think they're going to talk a lot about games like The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima running and playing better on the PlayStation 5. I think this is actually going to be a pretty significant talking point during the PlayStation 5 reveal because these are still some of the biggest games that Sony has left to come out for the PlayStation 4, and they're going to want to utilize them and show just how much better they're going to look playing on the PlayStation 5, and that's where they're going to emphasize and talk about the PlayStation 4's backwards compatibility and all that good stuff, and how all these games, or most of these games, are going to play better on the PlayStation 5. I think they're also going to announce at least one launch title exclusive during this event, and it's going to be Gran Turismo 7. I think this is another game that they're going to show off and kind of really hone in on just how good games are going to look in the PlayStation 5. They're going to use Gran Turismo 7 as kind of like a showcase game for the PlayStation 5, and I think that's all they're going to do at the reveal event. And the reason why I say this is because I do think they're going to save the majority of the games and everything else that we're going to be looking forward to, obviously, with the PlayStation 5 for E3 2020. Now, as to whether or not Sony is going to reveal the full PlayStation 5 specs during this event, I think they will, and I think they're going to hold off on the price. I think they're going to wait to reveal the price during E3 2020. Now, my second prediction here is that The Last of Us Part 2 it's going to break records. It's going to break Sony's sales record currently held by Spider-Man. I believe Spider-Man has sold 3.3 million copies within 3 days. I think The Last of Us Part 2 has the potential to break that record, maybe even hitting 4 million copies sold within the first 3 days. Not only is The Last of Us Part 2 an extremely anticipated game and there's a lot of hype surrounding it, I think it's also the fact that there are more PlayStation 4s out in the wild, and by the time this game does come out in May, there's going to be more PlayStation 4s out there in the wild than there ever has been. So I think the chances of The Last of Us Part 2 being able to break that record is very possible. I also think that The Last of Us Part 2 is going to become the highest rated PS4 exclusive this generation in terms of overall like Metacritic score and just the amount of rewards it may end up receiving and all that good stuff. I think that The Last of Us Part 2 is honestly going to be the best way possible that Sony could end the generation, alongside Ghost of Tsushima as well. But moving on to my third prediction here, and this is where there's going to be a lot to talk about here because we're going to be discussing Sony at E3 2020. First of all, I think Sony will be at E3 2020. I think it would be insane if they chose to skip out once again. I think it's very unlikely. So I think that E3 2020 is where they are going to reveal a lot or most of their PS5 titles, mainly focusing on the launch exclusives, but also teasing out a lot of games that are currently in development that we can expect to get on the PlayStation 5 in the coming years. And I also think that they're going to use it, obviously, to show off a lot of the third-party games, but we are really just going to be focusing on discussing the first-party games here. So I think one of the biggest announcements they're going to have is, first, they're going to announce Guerrilla Games, their second team, the game that they've been working on, and I think it's going to be a Socom Reboot. It's going to be cutting edge. It's going to be exclusive to just the PS5. I think it will be a first-person game this time around, and I think that Sony is going to try to have it out at the launch of the PlayStation 5 in order to compete with Microsoft's Halo Infinite. I know that maybe this seems like a long shot to some people, but I don't necessarily think it is. I believe, you're going to have Gran Turismo 7 there, but then you're also going to have this game from Guerrilla Games, which I think is going to be a Socom Reboot. Now, it may not be first person. It could end up being third person. I'm just predicting it will be first person because we know that Killzone has been in first person. And I think that Guerrilla Games is also going to tease Horizon 2. I think that we're going to see a big tease for that. I don't necessarily think we're going to get a release date for it. We could maybe get a release window, but they're just going to tease the fact that the game is almost done and that in the coming year or two you're going to hear more about it and you can maybe expect it within the next year and a half. And I think that that's going to be a huge deal. And I think that Sony is going to spend a lot of time emphasizing that all of the games, or most of the games they're showing here, will be exclusive to the PlayStation 5. Now, the next prediction I'm going to make here at E3 2020 is that this is where Sony is going to show off Bluepoint's game. It's going to be a Demon Souls Remake, and I think it's going to launch in February of 2021. I mean, this is where I could be off the mark, but I'm just trying to imagine how many games Sony wants to try to have at the launch of the PlayStation 5. Now, I want to say that I feel like this one could go either way. I could see Demon Souls Remake being ready at the launch of the PlayStation 5 to really bolster that launch lineup. In fact, I do think that that is actually maybe a little bit more likely considering Sony wants to really bring people on board to the PS5 as quickly as possible. But at the same time, I could see them wanting to kind of give it its own room to breathe and maybe making Demon Souls Remake that big February 2021 title. The only reason I think that might not happen is because I don't know if a Demon Souls Remake is a big enough title to really hold that early first half 2021 PlayStation 5 exclusive title. That may actually be reserved for potentially something like Horizon 2 or something else that we don't know about yet, but I do think it will be announced at E3 2020. I also want to say here that keep in mind, these are just predictions. I'm not trying to necessarily make any of them concrete because a lot of this stuff is flexible. I think it's just as likely that Sony could actually end up showing off this Demon Souls Remake during the reveal of the PS5 that's going to happen in February. But I just think maybe it would make more sense for them to hold off and have as many games as they can for E3 2020. But moving on from that, we're going to be talking about Naughty Dog at E3 2020, and I believe that they are going to reveal The Last of Us Online, the massive online component that will launch. It's actually, I don't want to say component because it's not going to be attached to The Last of Us Part 2, but we've talked about this. We know that Naughty Dog has confirmed two things. They've confirmed that they are working on a multiplayer game, and they have confirmed that it is related to the Factions multiplayer, and they confirmed that it has nothing to do with The Last of Us Part 2. This leads me to believe that they are currently working on a standalone Last of Us Online game that I think is going to launch in summer of 2021, because I think Sony wants to kind of spread these things out. If they're going to launch a new Socom game with the PlayStation 5. They don't want to have too many multiplayer games at one time, so I think that that's going to be like their shooter to compete with Halo Infinite at the launch of the PS5, and then later on they're going to have the big Last of Us Online during summer of 2021. I think it's going to be huge. I do think it has the potential to maybe even be free to play, essentially Sony's own Fortnite, if you will, although the game will absolutely be nothing like Fortnite. I'm just talking about that type of live service. But I also think that Naughty Dog is going to tease a new IP. I don't think it will be a big tease. I think it's just going to be them revealing the title of the game and maybe giving us the genre it's going to be in, or maybe giving us a little tease of what the setting will be and how it's going to be completely separate from Uncharted and The Last of Us. And I think that is going to get people incredibly excited. I do not think there will be any release window or any release date or anything like that. Obviously, it's going to take them a while because, they're getting ready to launch The Last of Us Part 2 this year. I think that Sony is going to tease a sequel to Spider-Man, and I think it will be just a very simple tease of showing maybe a little 30-second trailer of Spider-Man talking to somebody, doing something along those lines. It's not going to be like a massive full-blown reveal like gameplay or anything like that, but I think they want to tease it because we know, if some rumors are to be believed of what we've been hearing, that apparently Spider-Man is set to come out sooner than we think. It could possibly even come out as soon as holiday 2021, so I think Sony will tease that, and then they will really ramp up the marketing of that game. If they are trying to hit that holiday 2021 window with Spider-Man, they're going to ramp that up all throughout 2021. But I also think that Insomniac is going to announce a new Ratchet & Clank game, and I don't think they're going to give a release date on it. I think they'll give a release window of maybe sometime in 2021, maybe around May or summer, summertime at some point. Maybe I could see that, but I think they will not just show off or tease Spider-Man. They're also going to have a new game to announce. And I also think that Sony Santa Monica is going to tease potentially a new IP, alongside maybe teasing the next God of War. Now, this one's kind of tricky because the thing is, we have to ask ourselves, how much is Sony willing to reveal at one time during this E3? There's no doubt that this is going to be the biggest E3 for them, but they can't show everything at one time. They can't reveal everything at one time. I could see them holding off on the next God of War and maybe trying to tease this new IP that I believe Santa Monica is working on. We know that Cory Barlog has been acting a little bit suspicious on Twitter, making it seem as though he's working on some kind of new IP that's based in space or sci-fi or something like that. So I think Sony Santa Monica will be there to some capacity. I don't think they're going to tease both a new God of War and a new IP. I think it will be one or the other, and I'm leaning more towards a new IP. But moving on from that, I think that Sony San Diego, their secret second team that we know exists, and they're working on potentially a new Uncharted game. We know that they're working on a cinematic third-person action-adventure game. A lot of people are thinking that because there's some individuals, I believe, who worked at Naughty Dog are now working on the new San Diego team, they're rebooting Uncharted or maybe continuing it with his daughter or something like that. Although it could be a new IP, I don't think any release date is going to be given. I think that it's going to be just another tease letting us know that, hey, San Diego studio, they're not just doing baseball games anymore. They have a whole new unit, and they're working on a big third-person action-adventure game, and they'll talk more about it in the future, but they just want to let us know that it is a thing. And then I think finally Sony is going to announce at E3 2020, or maybe even potentially at the reveal event of the PlayStation 5, that they have officially acquired Bluepoint Games as a first-party studio. And that's pretty much all I have here. One other thing I do want to say here about the PlayStation 5 that I failed to mention up until this point is I do predict that whenever Sony does announce the price point for the PS5, I do still believe it's going to be $500. I know I've been talking a lot about it being $400, and it maybe not being as powerful as we have expected. But the truth is, if I had to put my money on what exactly we can expect, maybe it's just because I'm hoping for it, but I think it's going to be a $500 console, and I think it's going to be, right up there with the Xbox Series X. However, I do want to point out that I could be wrong, and I could be way off the mark on that. Sony could still be striving for that $400 price point, but I'm going to sit here and place my bet at it's going to be a $500 console. Moving on from that, number 4, I think that Sony during E3 2020, and I wanted to put this separately because I think it's a major reveal. Like, it's going to be possibly the biggest reveal that they save for E3 2020, or maybe they could do it at the PS5 reveal event, but I think E3 would be a bigger place to do it. Maybe not. Maybe it makes more sense at the PS5 reveal event, but they are going to reveal full backwards compatibility with PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 1. And whenever they choose to reveal it, it's going to be absolutely massive. They're going to announce that discs will work and that you can buy past games like PS3, PS2, and PS1 games from the PlayStation Store. However, the one caveat here is I don't think it's going to be all at once. I think it's going to be similar to what happened with Microsoft with backwards compatibility for the Xbox One. What I mean by that is they're still going to be working on getting as many games on board as they can through all the different publishers, but there's going to be a lot there from the start, and they're going to continue to build on it all throughout the generation with the PlayStation 5, and I think that that is going to be just a mega announcement that Sony has. And my number 5 prediction here is that there's going to be a big push for PlayStation Now. Obviously, we know this is something Sony is going to be building on. Better tech, lower latency, more games and features, all that stuff that you're going to expect them to kind of improve upon all throughout the generation. Sony will not put their games day and date on PlayStation Now, but they're going to continue to utilize the method that they've been using, which is to cycle these games or certain games for 3-month periods of time after their initial launch, maybe like a year after launch, 6 months, something along those lines. But for the much bigger titles, I think they're going to hold off on putting them on PlayStation Now for quite some time. And I also think that PSVR 2 will not be talked about in 2020, but it's actually going to be saved for E3 2021. I think that's really when Sony's going to be talking about it. And the final prediction I want to make here, this is number 6. I do think that when it comes to both of these consoles launching, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, I do think that the PS5 will sell more than the Xbox Series X, and it will get off to a significantly better start. When I say significant, I don't want to make it sound like the Xbox Series X or even Lockhart, like they're not going to do well. I think actually the next Xbox is going to do way better than the Xbox One, but I still think that the hype for the PS5 will be significantly greater than that of the Xbox consoles, and I think that Sony is going to provide much more incentive for people to want to go out there and buy the PS5, and I think it's going to maintain its lead going into next generation, and I think that Sony will actually be able to maintain that lead with a healthy flow of big first-party titles while supplementing it with those smaller first and second-party titles that we know to expect. And also, something I didn't put on this list here, but because I feel as though it's a little bit too obvious, is Godfall. We already know that this is going to be like a game launching with the PlayStation 5, either at or around the time of launch, so I didn't want to put that on this list because it's not really a prediction. We already know it's coming. But that's pretty much going to do it, guys. That's my first video of 2020. I wanted to give my 2020 PlayStation predictions, and I'm expecting to be wrong about most of this stuff simply because I have a lot here and a lot of it is very specific. Although I do think that there are some things here that certainly will happen, but I think a lot of them are just a matter of, are they actually going to happen in 2020 or are they going to happen sometime after, like in 2021 or maybe even 2022? But be sure to let me know your thoughts about my predictions down in the comments below, and feel free to leave some predictions of your own. I will be interested to see what predictions you guys leave down in the comments. Leave the video a like if you did enjoy it, if you agree with any of my predictions, or again, if you're just excited for the PlayStation 5, hit the like button. Really helps it out, lets me know you guys enjoy the content. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.